Mud to the ankles. A man in knee boots out past sunrise driving a stick into the ground with the flat of a hammer. Behind him, 40 acres of standing water catch the color of the sky silver, then pink, then gone gray again. He doesn't look up when the truck passes on the county road. He just keeps driving sticks, one after another, in a line that curves like something only he can see. A crow lands on a fence post to watch him. Even the crow seems unconvinced. By noon he has planted 200 whips of green willow, straight as soldiers, into ground too soft to hold a plow. His wife brings him water in a mason jar and doesn't ask why. She already knows the answer costs more breath than either of them has to spare. Down at the feed store in town, men will say the same 3 words about him before the week is out. That land's cursed. But out here, alone in the flood plain, Emmett Kowalczyk isn't planting a farm. He's planting something else entirely, and only the river will say what. If this is the kind of story that makes you believe good things still happen to good people who won't quit, go ahead and hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling us what part of the map you're watching from tonight. It helps more than you'd think, and I'd genuinely like to know. Mull Ridge sits in Izard County, Arkansas, in the crook of the Sugarloaf Fork, a tributary so temperamental the old surveyors gave up naming its bends. Spring here doesn't arrive so much as arrive twice, once with dogwoods, once with floodwater. Every few years the fork climbs its banks and reclaims the low ground like it never agreed to give it up in the first place. Everybody in the county knew which 40 acres those were. Everybody except, it seemed, the family that bought them. Emmett Kowalczyk had worked 11 years at the poultry plant in Melbourne before his knees gave out and his hours got cut to nothing. His wife Junia took in mending. Their boy Wendell wore his cousin's old boots 2 sizes too big, stuffed with newspaper at the toe. When the county land bank put the old Saddlemeyer bottoms up for sale, 40 acres nobody wanted, flooded more years than not. The price was low enough that Emmett could scrape it together from his severance and a small inheritance. Low enough, and also, everyone agreed, exactly what it was worth, which was nothing. At the feed store, Odo Krebs held court on the subject like a man paid to do it. Saddlemeyer land, he said, shaking his head at the domino table, won't grow a fence post, let alone a crop. That river takes it every April sure as Sunday. Garnet Voss, who ran the county's land improvement office, was kinder about it but no less certain. She'd sold Emmett the parcel under a redemption contract, buy it cheap, but show the county productive use within 12 months, or the land reverted back to the bank at 1/3 of what he'd paid. "I hope you know what you're doing," she told him at the courthouse steps, and it wasn't a compliment. 12 months. That was the whole of it. A date circled in pencil on a calendar nailed above the wood stove, close enough now that Junia had stopped mentioning it out loud. 12 months to turn cursed bottomland into something the county would call farming, or lose the 40 acres and the money both, and go back to nothing with less than they'd started. So Emmett worked. Not the way anyone in Mull Ridge expected a man to work a farm, no straight rows of corn, no soybeans pushed up defiant through the mud. Instead he walked the whole property with a hand level and a school notebook, marking the low seams where water gathered first and drained last. He dug swales along those seams, shallow as a wash tub, connecting them like beads on a string. He drove in willow and river cane exactly where the ground stayed wettest, and left the rest of the acreage bare and waiting, which from the road looked exactly like a man giving up halfway through a bad idea. "You're digging ditches in a swamp," Odell told him one Saturday, leaning on the fence with the particular satisfaction of a man about to be right. "That's like bailing out a boat with the plug still pulled." Emmett kept driving his stakes. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe I'm just deciding where the water goes instead of letting it decide for me." Odell laughed the kind of laugh that isn't really about humor, and told that line around town for a week, embellishing it a little more each time it left his mouth. Through the summer, the willows took. Thin green whips thickened into real growth, roots lacing down through mud that had never held anything longer than a season. The swales Emmett dug filled and drained with each rain, exactly as he'd planned on paper, moving water off the low seams and into a widening channel along the property's eastern edge. A channel he had shaped a little deeper, a little straighter, every week since March, using nothing but a shovel and a mule-drawn scraper he'd borrowed off his cousin. Nobody but Emmett and Junia understood yet that a channel is a suggestion, and rivers, given the right invitation, have been known to accept one. By September, the 12 months had shrunk down to 6 weeks, and there was still no crop in the ground that Garnet Voss's office would recognize on a form. She drove out to check on him, clipboard in hand, and stood at the edge of what still looked, to any reasonable eye, like organized mud. "I need productive agricultural use, Emmett," she said, not unkindly. "Willow whips and ditches don't fill out a line on this paperwork." He asked her plainly for the one thing he still needed, time through the next big rain. She gave him what the contract allowed and not a day more. The rain came the second week of October, and it did not come gently. 3 days of it, the kind old-timers measure against floods from decades back. The Sugarloaf Fork rose out of its bed and kept rising, past the fence lines, past the old high-water marks scored into the sycamores. In town, sandbags went up around the feed store. Out at the Kowalczyk place, Emmett stood on the porch in the dark, listening to a sound Junia had never heard before, not the flat roar of water spreading wide and slow, but something sharper. A tearing sound, low and steady, coming from the east side of the property. Morning broke gray and strange. Where the old river bend used to curl lazily past the eastern fence, there was now a straight, deep run of brown water cutting directly through the channel Emmett had dug all summer. The river had jumped its old bank entirely, tearing a new course exactly along the swale he'd shaped, willows and all, the roots holding the new bank together like a hand cupped around a candle flame. Neighbors came out from town just to look at it. Odo Krebs stood at the fence with his mouth actually open. What the flood had done to everyone else's bottomland, it had done differently here. Downstream, the Krebs place lost 2 acres of topsoil clean off the surface, washed to Missouri. But on the Kowalczyk 40, the new river channel had laid down a foot of fresh silt across ground that used to drown every spring and now, for the first time anyone could remember, drained clean within a day. The willows stood. The swales held. And the acreage that had been worthless mud in March was, by the second week of October, the only piece of bottomland in the county with its own river frontage and soil dark and rich enough to make an old farmer weep. Garnet Voss came out for her final inspection 2 days later, clipboard still in hand, and stood a long while at the edge of that new channel without writing anything down. She didn't need Emmett to explain what she was looking at. The evidence was standing right in front of her, green and rooted and glistening with new mud, exactly where a man with a hand level and a notebook had put it 7 months before. She signed the productivity form on the hood of her truck and didn't charge him for the postage. By spring, word of the Kowalczyk bottoms had traveled the length of Izard County the old-fashioned way, one porch conversation at a time, each one a little more astonished than the last. Odell Krebs, of all people, came by that April and asked, plain as anything, if Emmett would show him how the swales were dug. Emmett handed him a shovel without a word about it being owed. The willows are taller now, and the river runs where Emmett Kowalczyk decided, 7 Aprils ago, that it ought to. Junia keeps a jar of that first year's silt on the windowsill, dark as coffee grounds, just to remember what the ground looked like before it agreed with him. Folks still driving the county road slow down some, at the bend where the water turns, just to see it. What they were laughing at, it turns out, was a man patiently arguing with a river, and winning the argument one shovelful at a time.